In today's in-depth report, we uncover more information on the Obama administration's snooping around on journalists and their phone records. Today's story was written by Petr Svab. Recent released documents show the Justice Department's seizing of journalists' phone records during the administration of President Barack Obama was more extensive than previously reported. Now, in 2013, the Associated Press raised the alarm after the Justice Department informed the news service that it had subpoenaed and obtained records that didn't include content of calls from 21 mobile phones and landlines. These numbers were connected to AP journalists and their offices. But the DOJ had in fact issued 30 subpoenas for records of 30 phone lines, it believed to be those of the Associated Press reporters and editors, according to a 2014 report by the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility. The report, heavily redacted, was obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University and the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Now, the subpoenas covered a period between April 1st, 2012 to May 10, 2012, as part of an investigation into who leaked classified documents that the AP used to produce several articles about the CIA foiling a Yemen-based plot to put a bomb on an airliner. AP President and Chief Executive Gary Pruitt said in a statement on May 14, 2013, the White House had said there was no credible threat to the American people in May of 2012. The AP story suggested otherwise, and we felt that it was important information and the public deserved to know it. The OPR report says at the time the Deputy Attorney General, who was James Cole, only approved the subpoenas on February 6, 2013, after investigators interviewed more than 550 witnesses and reviewed thousands of government documents, but still failed to produce investigative leads concerning the source of the leak. The AP alleged that the DOJ had gone too far by seizing records for general numbers for some of AP's offices, including those in New York City and Washington. Now, Pruitt said in a letter to then Attorney General Eric Holder, these records potentially reveal communications with confidential sources across all of the news gathering activities undertaken by the AP during the targeted period. He also said that the records could provide a roadmap to AP's news gathering operations and disclose information about AP's activities and operations that the government has no conceivable right to know. The DOJ's media guidelines require that subpoenas against journalists are narrowly drawn, but the OPR reports show how low of a bar that could be, according to Ramya Krishnan, attorney at Knight First Amendment Institute, and Trevor Tim, Freedom of the Press Executive Director. Now, the OPR report indicates that the DOJ originally wanted to subpoena records of the New York Times, Washington Post, and ABC News reporters. As well, since those outlets followed up on the AP articles and they too apparently used classified information, including some that wasn't used in the AP articles. But because the DOJ held back on those, the OPR concluded that the AP subpoenas were already significantly and deliberately narrowed. The guidelines also require that journalists be contacted ahead of time if their records are to be seized, as long as such negotiations would not pose a substantial threat to the integrity of the investigation. As a result, the OPR stated that the DOJ could reasonably conclude that it was unable to find that negotiations would not pose a substantial threat to the integrity of the leak investigation, and thus the DOJ was free to forego negotiation and decline to provide the Associated Press with advance notice of the subpoenas. According to Krishnan and Tim, the Justice Department's narrow interpretation of the media guidelines throws into sharp relief the weakness of some of the only legal protections journalists have. In response to the uproar over the subpoenas, Holder had the guidelines revised, but they still include much of the same flexibility, including the exception that journalists will only be notified in advance unless such notice would pose a clear and substantial threat to the integrity of the investigation, risk grave harm to national security, or present an imminent risk of death or serious bodily harm. The Associated Press and the DOJ didn't respond to requests for comment. Now let's take a look at the leak crackdown. Under Eric Holder, the DOJ pursued at least 9 leak-related prosecutions, more than all previous administrations combined, the New York Times reported. President Donald Trump also called for a leak crackdown after his administration faced a stream of classified information reaching the media. And one of the most striking examples, Trump's calls with his Australian and Mexican counterparts shortly after entering office were leaked to the media. On December 20, 2018, former Senate staffer James Wolfe was sentenced to 2 months in prison for lying to FBI agents who were investigating the leak of a top-secret surveillance warrant application on a former associate of the Trump campaign, Carter Page. As part of that investigation, the DOJ obtained some of the email and phone records of a New York Times reporter, Ali Watkins. Watkins was in an intimate relationship with Wolfe since 2013, spanning her time at the publications including McClatchy newspapers, the Huffington Post, Politico and BuzzFeed News, but ended it before she joined the New York Times, she told the publication. Wolfe's indictment alleged he leaked classified information to at least 4 reporters. The New York Times had said Watkins was one of them, although she denies ever using Wolfe as a source. And that's all for today's in-depth report on the Epoch News, folks. Please make sure to leave your thoughts below and don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Angela Anderson.